Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming through to the SABC News Desk and really fitting us into your busy schedule.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Elizabeth, an overwhelming no from COP delegates on the DMM yesterday. Now, you were there, you saw this whole debate and all the dynamics play out. How can South Africa and other SADC nations fortify their legal argument? Because it's an issue sure to come up at future CITES as well.
Thank you. We need to understand where the decision-making mechanism came about. It did not begin with this Conference of the Party 17. It was put in place about 10 years ago. And at that time, it was a compromise at the time when the 4 countries in Southern Africa were permitted to do a one-off sale at the time. So as a compromise, and of course having the elephant species going to Appendix 1, at the time, then the compromise was as those decisions were taken at the time, then there should be a process to begin looking at what will happen in future on the process. And in fact, UN Environment and the CITES Secretariat were trusted to work with the countries in order to get this mechanism in place. Negotiations have been going on for all those years, but of course we had not succeeded to get the agreement of the countries on the mechanism. Unfortunately, of course, the discussions continued here. They were voted and did not go through. But actually, for me personally, I look at it as a win-win situation because you have countries which basically wanted the DMM to be not to be extended, to be closed. And then you had the other side where basically we are saying, if then we will not be able to extend the DMM, then we go back to the 1997 when it was established, meaning that you take a situation whereby as if nothing had happened since then. So each side actually won. And in such negotiations, it's a compromise.
Elizabeth, that once-off sale of ivory you're speaking of happened in 2008 to China and Japan. But what then also happened, it inflamed this debate that rages on even today, that the sale of ivory just goes on and pushes up the demand and hence increases the risk of poaching and so on. What is the UN position on ivory stockpiles in Africa right now? Should it be destroyed or should it be sold to generate the much needed revenue?
As the United Nations, we have no position. We are guided by the wish of the countries. However, to us what is important, which I think even the countries have also understood, whether there is a sale or not, the fact still remains that these species need to be sustainably protected, and for them to be protected, then issues of enforcement have to be in place, issues of effective national legislation have to be in place, issues of monitoring, accurate data, all these need to be in place. So that's how we look at the situation with the UN. But then the final decision of whether the species should be uplisted or downlisted, we leave it to the country. But whatever the results will be, still we need to enforce, we need to comply, and this, otherwise then the species will go into extinction.
On the point of uplisting or downlisting, lions were very much on the agenda late yesterday. A vote was still pending on escalating the species to Appendix 1. How did delegates vote on that one?
I was not actually in that group, which should have happened today, but to the best of my knowledge, until lunchtime, that had not happened.
So whichever way that decision goes, how will it impact on the trade of the species on the continent right now?
You see, and this is where the issue of accurate data comes in, because it's the data which enables the countries to determine whether the species is in danger for extinction or can still be traded but regulated. And each country has its own data. And you see, the figures which exist in the country are the ones which determine which position the country will take. But then for us as the UN, whatever position the country takes, enforcement is still key. And of course, in terms of impact, there are issues related to the role of rural communities, their livelihoods. They live with these animals. And therefore, and that's why I'm saying, whether they're uplisted or downlisted, what do we do with the local communities? What incentives are there? How do they continue to get their livelihood? How are they being protected from the dangers of these animals? So this is where then, as UN, we say we should not forget. And the other thing also we should remember, when we come to CITES, attention is on trade. But we need to think of what is it beyond trade to protect the species. These are not so much the discussions in CITES. It is trade, enforcement, of course, legislation, of course, compliance, of course, but there are other wider wildlife management issues.
Very quickly, Elizabeth, some African countries are still refusing to criminalize the use of bushmeat. Now, why the long struggle on this one? Is it a lack of clear policy, a lack of political will or commitment? What are your views?
I don't think it's the lack of political will, but it's because for a number of societies, particularly the local communities, bushmeat is also their source of protein. So this is where basically the discussion should be, while we protect the bushmeat, how do we also sustainably ensure those cultural societies where they still depend on bushmeat, they are able to get their source of protein? Unless there are alternatives, because again, it should not be don't do without giving them alternatives.
A viable solution. Thank you, Elizabeth Mrema from UN Environment, joining us on the SABC News Desk. Now, one of the biggest names